Good afternoon, everybody. This is another edition of the Passball Show brought to you by JohnPielli.com as well as St. Aloysius Church and School in Jackson, New Jersey. Lots of stuff we're going to get into today. I hope everybody that listened enjoyed the show yesterday. Lots of stuff we're going to get into today. Obviously, this being an interactive show, I want to just keep letting people know that you can contribute. Anything that's on your mind in the world of baseball, sports, and unifying America, please let me know. A couple comments from yesterday. I'm going to do what I can, Pat, to try not to move as much as I did yesterday. But I tell you, when somebody's passionate, when somebody's fired up, when somebody's got some things they got to get off their chest, it's hard to avoid, the actions. And I got the microphone set to a point where the sound is not going to be heard if I move around too much. But I'm going to try the best I can to stay towards the camera, keep my points going into the microphone, which has always been an issue to me. Thanks, Billy. Always respect your points of view. So any compliment you throw my way, in regards to the Yankee talk yesterday, is definitely taken to heart in a positive way. Wanted to start off the show today by talking a little bit about the trading deadline of baseball. So we're getting close. I believe it's Tuesday is the 31st. So we know we're pretty close to being at the point where teams are going to try to set themselves up in regards to where they want to be. You have the media pressure, which keeps throwing it in people's faces, saying you got to be either a buyer or a seller. And one of the main points that I was making yesterday is I don't agree with that point 100%, because I think you could set yourself up to be a better team next year and not necessarily have to sell. It might not be about 2018, it could be about 2019, but you don't necessarily have to move all your good players. You can start building towards next year and say, hey, you know what? There's a player that we have that might be a free agent at the end of this year. Maybe we'll make an effort to re-sign him. We don't necessarily have to trade him and get something in return for him. And one of the things that's bothered me, and I continue to express it, is the vibes from the fans and the vibes from the media, which continues to push this narrative, which is if you're not a good baseball team, you have to trade a certain amount of your good players or your expiring contracts or players that right now in your mindset may not necessarily be part of the future, and accept whatever that good team or that organization that's looking to upgrade itself is willing to offer you in return. And that frustrates me, because that's a narrative that continues to be thrown out there. It's a narrative that, writers, people that are very accomplished, talk show hosts, people that are in the national spotlight, people that really understand what it is that they're talking about, continue to push this narrative, which I don't think is particularly accurate. Each baseball team, similar to each sports team, or any organization that is setting itself up to try to succeed, should operate in their own distinct way. And sometimes it might not necessarily bode well for success initially. You don't have to tear it down if you're having a bad season in 2018. You can get yourself to a point where you're a little bit better next year, or maybe in a point or in a position where you can make a little bit more of a run next year. You've seen worse the first happen. You certainly see it happen a lot in the National Football League. The first thing that I wanted to talk about today is sometimes there is perception out there. And perception could be pushed by the media. Perception could be pushed by the fans. And in some people's mind, it becomes reality. It becomes reality when people speak of an assumption about the way an organization operates itself and starts to state it in a way that it's a fact. And I'm going to use the New York Mets as an example here, because this is a team that obviously did some good things. Sandy Alderson in his front office made a good run for the postseason in 2015 by getting Yoenis Cespedes. Got them to the World Series that year. And for only the second time in the history of the New York Mets franchise, they made the postseason in a consecutive year. He deserves credit for that. 2017 didn't work out. 2018 has been a lot worse. And if you go back to the trading deadline of 2017, and if you really want to figure out where the pressure or where the amount of anger and frustration that I have in what has gone on with this organization stems from. I'm not one of those that yells, hey, you got to sell the team, get rid of the franchise, owners, get rid of everybody. That's not the way that I think. But when I see a problem that could very well rear its ugly head again, I don't want to see somebody make the same simple mistakes. And I watched the New York Mets at the trading deadline pretty much doing everything they can to sell their players. This was like Charlie Finley in the 1970s with the Oakland Athletics. The only difference, Charlie Finley had a lot better players when he was trying to sell Reggie Jackson. He was trying to sell Joe Rudy and Raleigh Fingers to any other baseball team that would take on their contracts, because Charlie O. Finley did not want to pay his players. He was frustrated about the abolition of the reserve clause and the fact that players were certainly going to have the opportunity to make a lot more money than they're making at this very moment in the 1970s. I get that. But the New York Mets decided, Sandy Alderson, maybe he was told, maybe Jeff Wilpon stood up and said, listen, this is going to be a bad season. You owe me, because of the amount of money that the New York Mets are paying with regards to their payroll, that you must slash the payroll. And Sandy Alderson acted in the last trading deadline and the last couple months of 2017 as if he had to unload players' contracts without having any sort of concern as far as what he was getting in return. And it was not a good way to operate. If you're a businessman, you'd understand that it's probably not the best way to run your business. But the decision was made. However it was made, it was decided that the Mets' priorities at the trading deadline last year and into the month of August were to be on shedding players' salaries off of their payroll as opposed to anything that they were getting back in return in a trade. And I have a concern that perhaps the same philosophy is applying right now and is coming down from the same owners to a different general manager. Right now, John Ricco and J.P. Ricciardi and Omar Minaya are the hat trick, whatever you want to call it, the triumvirate, the three minds that are putting themselves together to try to make the best baseball decisions they can for this franchise. But I'm concerned if the same mandate is there saying you must get rid of salary. Juris Familia was traded for a AA second baseman, a AAA pitcher, $1 million of international slot money, which I do think there's some value to it. And you can find maybe in 2-3 years, you can find that $1 million helped the Mets get a couple international players that at that point become integral parts of their franchise going forward. That could be a good trade. But the thing that stands out, that scares me, is the fact that the Mets asked the Athletics to pick up the rest of Familia's contract. And John Ricco had said a couple weeks ago that they were going to prioritize the return of what they were going to get back in any trade that they made, as opposed to having that team pick up the salary. Now he goes out there and he tries to take a couple steps back, saying, hey, the difference would not have been that much. Only Billy Beane and David Force and Ricco and anybody with the Mets that was making that deal or was an integral part of what was going on in that trade as it was happening know for a fact of whether the Mets could have gotten more back if they took on Juris Familia's salary. Made a trade today, dealing as Asdrubal Cabrera. Actually got them, according to, I believe it's, Baseball Prospectus or Baseball America, the top 10 prospect in the Philadelphia Phillies system, a pitcher, AA pitcher that's on the 40-man roster for Philadelphia. I mean, I don't know if I'm going to get so excited about that. But I think of the possibilities, and I think we could all agree, for the most part, if we're rational as baseball fans right now, and if we're rational in regards to how we're talking about the New York Mets right now. Jacob deGrom isn't going to get traded at the trading deadline. Noah Syndergaard cannot be traded at the trading deadline. And I think half of the media and the fans have forgotten that the guy's on a freaking disabled list, and he's made 2 starts in the last 2 months, or last month and a half. nobody's going to trade for a guy that's on the disabled list. And if you're a team that has a guy on the disabled list, I certainly wouldn't want to make that trade dealing a player that is on the disabled list. The last thing that I want to say about this is I have a little bit of an issue trusting the people that are making these trades. What I believe the Mets should do is they should bring in somebody from outside the organization, have a full, extensive general manager search, hire themselves their next Sandy Alderson of 2010, or their next Omar Minaya of 2004, or Frank Cashin of 1980. And I obviously, we're talking about somebody that you're expecting to run a franchise for a very long time. I would be okay if it was a young executive. I'd be okay if it was a proven executive. But I think the Mets have to go outside their organization and change the perception that exists when it comes to making a deal with the New York Mets. Because I think other executives are looking at the Mets and saying that this is a team that's a bunch of pushovers. They don't have stability in their front office. Last year, they cared more about having teams pick up money on their contracts than getting quality players from a particular system of a team that they're trading with. And I think teams are going to come up to the Mets and say, hey, how can we get Jacob deGrom? We could get Jacob deGrom if we pick up his contract over the next 2 years, and we don't have to give up that much. Now, hopefully, John Ricco and J.P. Ricciardi and Omar Minaya can be smart enough, and I believe enough in them that they would not make a stupid trade like that. But they can look at Noah Syndergaard and say, hey, he's going to hit arbitration years, and at some point you're going to have to pay him a lot. We'll pay him. We're just going to lower the return. And the Mets are at a turning point right now in their franchise history because they have an opportunity, if they do some things right, if they invest a little bit in position players for next year, if they keep the majority of their starting rotation intact, I would be okay of making a trade, but I just don't trust the people that are making the trades. And I think Major League Baseball has caught on. Now you look at what was going on in San Diego a couple of years ago with A.J. Preller, the general manager. He has the separate medical records, and he was trying to deceive anybody that he was making a trade with, saying, hey, these guys are healthier than how they really are. He has his own medical records. He has different medical records that he passes on to other teams. You look at John Coppolella in Atlanta, who was doing what he could by taking advantage of little things that he was changing and he was doing illegally in the international market when it came to signing free agents. And all of a sudden, word gets around about stuff like that. Word got around about A.J. Preller and what he was doing. So teams were very cautious and probably didn't want to make a trade with him. You know, if you're Mike Hill, if you're Dave Dombrowski, a couple guys that actually made trades with A.J. Preller and got fake medical records. Now, it took a while before those guys could build trust again. But just like a typical rumor that's shared in an office, it becomes the perception of what somebody's about, and that perception becomes reality. And I'm wondering, if you look back at what the Mets did at the trading deadline last year, and you compare it to what they're going through right now, I wonder how many teams are thinking about players on the Mets that they could get for below the value of what they're really worth if they just simply pick up the salary. And I don't know how much the Cabrera deal is broken down in regards to how much the Phillies are going to pay or how much the Mets are going to pay. I mean, the Mets may have gotten a decent prospect back, and he's ranked as number 10. I respect that. I think it's the highest level or highest number of a prospect that they've gotten back in any trade that they've made over the last couple of years. And certainly, you know, the Mets farm system is not very good, so you're looking at a pitcher that's probably going to move up in regards to where he ranks amongst the Mets' top prospects. But I wonder how much of a reputation is going on about the Mets front office being pushovers and what they're being told by their ownership of having to shed salaries, and how many teams are going to look to want to take advantage of that. And if that's the fact, you're not setting your organization up with the opportunity to be successful in the short or long term. I was thinking about, training camp starting in the National Football League. And I look at the New York Giants and I say, this is a team that obviously being 3-13 last year, finishing in no way near where they were expected to last year. Team coming off of a playoff season in the year before. Everything just seemed to, pretty much be destroyed. They got off to that ridiculous one and whatever start. The coach decides to pull Eli Manning in his consecutive game streak. He gets fired the next week. And the New York Giants, who are known as a very stable organization and a very fundamentally sound organization that goes up from the top to the bottom, pretty similar to what we've thought over the last several years of the St. Louis Cardinals in Major League Baseball. Now, obviously, you've seen things turn for the worse with the Cardinals. Fundamentals have gone down over the last couple of years. They believe that had something to do with the manager, so they made a change. The Giants had Tom Coughlin as their coach for many years. Coughlin probably wanted to still be the coach. He leaves, Ben McAdoo comes in. Yes, they make it to the playoffs next year, but a lot of the fundamental soundness of the organization kind of deteriorated last year. And the Giants, who were known for not being, gossip and slanderish, for not being an organization where you hear a lot about he said, she said, all of a sudden became that. With the coach and the quarterback and Geno Smith and Davis Webb, who's the guy that a lot of people were expecting to see and didn't see. McAdoo gets fired. Steve Spagnuolo finishes off the season as the coach. Giants with nothing to play for. Eagles in their own division win the Super Bowl. So look at this team this year, and obviously if you're a Giants fan, you have a lot to be excited about. You have a new coach, Pat Shurmur. You have a new running back, and Saquon Barkley was taken second overall in the draft. You got some free agent moves. Your offensive line looks a little bit better. And obviously there's some talent that exists when you're talking about the team as a whole. They're probably better than a 3-13 team on paper. I don't know how great they are. But if you happen to be, and I'm not, if you happen to be a Giants and New York Mets fan, which there's a lot of people that are. I'm not. Obviously, I'm a Mets fan, but I'm more of a fan of football in the entire league, so I don't root for a local team. But if you happen to root for the Mets and the Giants, you look at what the Mets did last offseason. They moved on from Terry Collins. I think a lot of it was pressure from the front office and the ownership. There was also Terry Collins probably deciding that he had managed long enough, and it was a good enough time to call it quits. It was probably the perfect storm. A couple winning seasons, and all of a sudden a disastrous 2017 season was probably a good year for him to walk away. Good time for the Mets to make a change, bring in a new manager, bring in a new coaching staff. Of course, what the Mets did is they brought in a pitching coach, Terry Francona's pitching coach in Cleveland, Mickey Callaway, and also brought in a very well-respected pitching coach in Dave Island, hoping that these two guys working together would get the most out of the Mets pitchers. It's had mixed results. Callaway has struggled, I think, as a manager. I think the position is a little bit tougher than what he thought it would be. Can he handle it? I don't know. I think a manager in Major League Baseball is only going to be judged off of wins and losses. So if a certain point goes by and Mickey Callaway is on a team that is losing game after game and is having losing season after losing season, then I think he's a losing manager. You're only as good as the players that you got, and you're only as good as the amount of wins that you get, as opposed to the amount of losses you get. So if this team can become a winning team, if this team can play a couple months in the rest of the 2018 season with a little more gusto and fervor and passion, and win more games than they lose, then I think a manager looks good. If this team falls on its face, which odds are it probably will, and it's not me being pessimistic, it's the Mets are a little bit less of a good team than they were when they had Juris Familia. The Mets are a little bit less of a team than they were when they had Asdrubal Cabrera before they traded him. The Mets were a better team with Yoenis Cespedes. They were a better team with Noah Syndergaard in the lineup as a pitcher. Todd Frazier in a lineup at third base. So without those players and without the other players that they may or may not trade, either before the trading deadline or after the trading deadline, expectations are going to be that this team's probably not going to do too well. So that's where you say, hey, can you get your younger players or the players that were probably not expecting to be getting a lot of playing time, can you get something out of them? Can you get some fire? Can you get them to play the game hard, play the game right, put them in the best position that they can possibly be to win? And if you can get some more out of the players that you got that are a little subpar right now, those are brownie points for a manager. But if you look at it and you want to ask, the double pitching coach with the New York Mets, has it worked out this year? I'd say it's about, 60-40 against. Noah Syndergaard hasn't necessarily gotten better. Jacob deGrom has. Steven Matz has. Zach Wheeler has. A lot of ideas between Callaway and Dave Island about how they were going to build the bullpen. Bullpen's cost them a lot of games this year. I don't even know how it's supposed to be constituted now. Anthony Swarzak's been a disaster. Robert Gesellman's been overused. And anybody else that they brought up just seems to not be able to get the job done on a consistent basis. So it's mixed reviews. Now, how does this apply to the New York Giants? New York Giants look at themselves and they say, hey, offensively, they have a potential Hall of Fame quarterback, which I think the 2 Super Bowls that Eli Manning has won should put him in a position where he should be a Hall of Famer once his career is over. It can be disputed. He's not necessarily his brother. He's not Peyton. He's not Brett Favre. He's not Johnny Unitas. He's not Joe Montana. He may not even be Ben Roethlisberger. But he's had a very good career. And the question that the New York Giants asked itself, what do we got to do to get the most out of our quarterback in the last couple of years that he has of his career? The big decision was made that they were going to go forward with Eli Manning as their quarterback. Pat Shurmur, when he was hired as the head coach, was behind that. Dave Gettleman, the general manager, when he took over the New York Giants, was behind that. Those were decisions that were made by those guys, and everybody was on the same page in regards to Eli Manning being the Giants quarterback in the next year, maybe next 2 years. They drafted Saquon Barkley. They got Odell Beckham Jr. coming back. They got Ingram, who they drafted a couple of years ago. They have a good offense. They beefed up their offensive line. The focus is going to be, how can we get more out of this particular offense? And the Giants did something very similar to what the New York Mets did. The Mets felt that their strength was pitching, wanted to make sure that they had a manager that was going to emphasize pitching and bring in a pitching coach that is also going to do the same thing. The New York Giants did that as well. They brought in an offensive-minded head coach in Pat Shurmur. They also brought in a very well-respected offensive coordinator in Mike Shula. So they're in a position where their expectations are to get the most out of this offense. And we'll see. We'll see how Eli Manning handles things in the latter years of his career. A lot more pressure is going to be on him. He's going to be expected to perform, and if he doesn't, or if the Giants' offense struggles this year, a lot more of the blame is going to be on Eli Manning than it was on other players and the coaching staff. So it's going to be interesting to see. While we're on the topic of the NFL, you hear that the Dallas Cowboys are insinuating, not making the statement directly, but obviously whenever the president sends out a tweet that backs what somebody is doing, it's going to be, number one, blown out of proportion, but also is going to be assumed that that's what the Dallas Cowboys plan on doing. The issue that I have in regards to the anthem protest is not the players that are actually going out there and doing it. It's the cause and the reason that they are doing it. Going back to what Colin Kaepernick did when he decided to kneel for the National Anthem as a protest to police brutality, and how the National Anthem became a symbol of their protest. Now, more focus right now is being put on the National Anthem as the issue, when it should be what the protest was in the first place, which was about police brutality. And you don't hear many discussions about police brutality. You know, you hear, the guy with what do you call it, the defensive back, Reed, who hasn't been signed yet. Obviously, Kaepernick is suing the league, so he's probably not going to play anytime soon. You got those implications, and what happens, unfortunately, when you stand out and try to make a point. I'm neither for nor against Kaepernick. I actually respect the fact that he was willing to put everything that he had accomplished and his entire professional life on the line to support the cause that he's supporting. Like I said, the problem that I have now isn't about the protest. It's the fact that it seems to be more of an emphasis on protesting the national anthem as opposed to protesting police brutality. And I know some players have stood up. Some players have put their money where their mouth is. But I'm still waiting to see National Football League players storming a police station or a courthouse, getting involved in particular states and legislatures and bills to potentially do something about police brutality, which I believed all along was the whole purpose and reason behind the protest. So you got a right to protest, but just at some point you got to make it clear what the protest is about. And I thought that was made already. I thought the protest was about police brutality. Now it just seems to, hey, do you like the national anthem? Or do you not like the national anthem? And I thought players in the National Football League would direct their protest where it needs to be. And maybe it's full blown into the president right now. And if it is, you got the right to feel that way. But my frustration when it comes to the discussion about national anthem protest is not so much what is being done to the players that are protesting. It's what is the protest actually about? Is it the national anthem that you're protesting, or are you protesting police brutality? Because when it comes to the time to protest, it shouldn't matter if the emphasis is on protesting police brutality. Is it about the anthem? Does it have to be done during the time of the national anthem? Can it be done at a different time? And I understand that the discussion, hey, can it be done at a different time than a national anthem, is taken, like somebody should back off what they're doing in the first place. But I thought the protest was about police brutality. And I'd like to see more discussion about that, because I still believe in my heart of hearts that that's the biggest issue here. Not that every police officer is not doing their job, but some of them are not. And if they are quote-unquote bad apples, which I believe they are, the majority of police officers, I believe, do their job and will put their life in a line before mine at any day, and would put their life on the line for anybody, regardless of what you look like. That being said, there are some bad apples. And if I was part of the majority that was doing my job correctly, I would want to rid myself of the bad apples. More discussion has to be about that, not about what teams are going to make a big deal if the players decide to protest. It should be more about what is going to happen in regards to the issue that we have. Police brutality exists. It's happening, and it should not be happening. Last segment of the show we're going to do today is called Nobody's Listening. And once again, this is brought to you by JohnPielli.com, as well as St. Aloysius Church and School in Jackson, New Jersey. I do thank everybody who's tuned in today. And as we get set for the Nobody's Listening segment on this show. Once again, this is the Nobody's Listening segment of the Passball Show, and this is a time where we talk about something that is not a direct relation to the world of sports. The Passball Show is baseball, sports, and unifying America. And I'm not going to get so much into unifying America, because I kind of talked about that already when I was talking about the anthem protest and how it should be more about police brutality than it is, the actual national anthem of this country. I was thinking about this the other day. We have a bunch of movies, hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of movies that we've had in this country and in other countries. And I think about the popularity of some, popularity of a lot of movies, and if we're going to rank what my favorite 100 movies were of all time, it will be a lot different than what a lot of people would think. But the one thing that I wanted to eliminate when it comes to ranking movies is you shouldn't say that the best movies that the critics say are the best movies, or go onto a website that ranks the 100 best movies. You don't have to necessarily like all those movies. One's list would be expected to be different than somebody else's. I love sports movies. I love historical movies. Not all of them, but movies that have stuff to do with things that happen in history. And I love comedies. I love dumb humor. And anybody that's heard me talk knows about the dumb humor that I like to throw in, dry, but to the point about stuff that I find a little bit funny. So if I'm ranking movies, and I want to say the best movies of all time, they would all be comedies, they would all be sports movies, they would all be movies that have something to do with things that happened in history. I'm not a comic book fan. So if I was going to rank movies, let's say, Batman or Superman or Spider-Man or Thor or Black Panther, so many different things that that people like, people enjoy. As we hit probably the 3/4 point of the Passball show today. But there's many movies that are out there that people enjoy. They're horror movies. There's people that love drama. There's people that love, complete fictional movies. People like nonfiction. People like movies that are, about superheroes. Those movies don't apply to me. So if I'm putting together my list of what I think the best movies are of all time, it's going to be different than the quote-unquote critics, right? The Siskel and, Eberts of the world. Those that make their lives and have, set it based off of ranking movies as far as what they think are good and what they think are bad movies. So my interest in movies is different than yours. Then every possible movie that I rank might be different than yours. So I was putting together a list, and I wanted to get up to 100, and I'm not going to read all of them. And I actually got to 85. And I found that the movies that I like kind of vary based off of interest a little bit, but pretty similar to what I said before. We're pretty much the same kind of movies. Stupid humor movies, sports movies, mostly baseball movies, movies about things that have happened in American history. I find them all interesting. And obviously, if you look at what I put in as my top 10, I think every single one of them is a comedy or based off of a parody. Naked Gun, Office Space, Major League, Step Brothers, 40-Year-Old Virgin, Back to the Future, Tropic Thunder, The Interview, Accepted, Superbad, Animal House. And then as I get into it, a lot of movies are pretty similar. Anchorman, Rudy was a historical movie. I got it ranked as number 12. A lot more comedies. Clerks, American Pie, Home Alone, Billy Madison, The Promotion, Friday. And I got movies like Rocky and The Godfather. And here's the one thing that I think when it comes to movies like that, watch them. If you enjoy them, if you like them, it's one thing. But don't cave into the pressure of what people tell you should like. And that's the thing that has been frustrating to me, is that you feel like you have to rank certain movies. If you like Goodfellas, you have to like The Godfather, or vice versa. What if you watched a certain movie and heard a lot about it over a series of years and finally watched it and realized it wasn't what you thought it was? Or was it what people told you? Every one of us has the opportunity to be a film critic. Not everybody's going to get paid for it. Not everybody's going to be compensated like many that have done it before or do it for a living. But we all have the right to be critics over the movies that we watch. And it's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. I think it's very good that we have the opportunity to rank movies based off of our own personal preference and not the preference of what people tell us that we should think. So I think it's something interesting. I put together, like I said, if you listened to the show for a while, the top 100 offensive players in Major League Baseball history, which took a lot of time, a lot of analysis, and a lot of judging based off of generations of players. And I'm working on the same thing as it applies to movies. But, once again, I have my own personal bias to movies because they're based off of what I think and not what anybody around me thinks, not what any critic thinks, not what anybody that's in the general public thinks. So, your top 100 movies, I would expect to be completely different than mine. In fact, me running off whatever I feel my top 100, and like I said, it's 85 right now. And there was a couple movies that I thought were good that I said, hey, they're not top 100 material, so I didn't even list them. But if we go back in the greatest movies in history, I think we'll find that some of us have common denominators. But I don't think every single person that's trying to rank the favorite movies or the best movies that they've ever seen should have the same or a similar type of list. Because if you like comic books, then I would expect your top 10 movies to be all about comic book characters. And it doesn't mean that you're wrong. It means those are the most impactful and the favorite movies that you've ever seen. I may be a little bit different. Doesn't make me wrong. It's just my opinion. And think about it. When we think of sports as the biggest example of my opinion against your opinion. And we've battled about it. We've argued about it. Trust me, there's been people that have been arguing with me about my show for years upon years. And I don't have any ill feelings towards that because sports is very subjective. It's a matter of one's opinion against the next. The New York sports fan will feel that they have a superiority in regards to their ability to watch sports. They're the best fans in the country. They feel that way. I'm not declaring it. But the people in Philadelphia feel like they have the best sports fans in the country. And nobody's really wrong. In fact, every fan should feel like they're a good fan. Should feel like they give the right amount of support to their team. Should feel like they're there for thick and thin. Should feel when their team wins, part of them wins as well. And that's why I have a problem with ranking fans. Anybody that says, oh, yeah, man, New York sports fans are so superior to anybody else. You know who believes that? New York sports fans. So if you want to make that as a point, name somebody, have somebody speak for you that is a fan of sports teams in a different region that's going to say they agree with you. I'm a Boston fan, hypothetically. I'm a Philadelphia fan, hypothetically. I'm a Minnesota fan, hypothetically. And I believe that New York has the best sports fans. If you could get somebody to say that, then I'll start believing your point. Once again, as it applies to movies, my list of my top 100 movies is going to be much different than your list of top 100 movies. Because different things appeal to me than appeal to you. A little bit of a recap of some of the stuff we talked about today on a past ball show. Should there be some fear, if you're a New York Mets fan, that the Mets front office is getting a reputation as being pushovers? Or is the concern in a deal that the New York Mets are looking to make more about the other team picking up salary than it is helping the Mets get better? The New York Mets hired a manager that's a pitching coach and hired another well-known pitching coach in Dave Island. The New York Giants hired an offensive coach in Pat Shermer and an offensive coordinator that was very renowned and well-known in Mike Shula. Are there similarities between this coming season's New York football giants than this past season New York Mets. Obviously, if you're a fan of both teams, you hope not. We'll see how things end up working out. Once again, the protests that exist in the National Football League, should they be more about the National Anthem, or should they be more about police brutality? Those are questions that are not being asked right now. And once again, having fun, ranking your top movies, my top 100, or my top 10, or my top 5, or my favorite movie, which by the way is Naked Gun, is probably going to be different than what your favorite movie is. Your top 10 movies, your top 100 movies, based off of what your interest is. And how it applies to sports, obviously, if I'm a fan of a certain team, I'm going to have a bias towards that team. If I'm a fan of a certain group of sports teams in a certain region, I'm going to have more of a bias for them. It's the way sports work. They're subjective. Same thing with movies. We'll be back with you tomorrow. I do want to thank everybody for tuning in today. This is the Passball Show, brought to you by JohnPLA.com, as well as St. Aloysius Church and School in Jackson, New Jersey. God bless you, and as always, I'll see you on the other side.